December 22, 1944. A brutal winter storm had turned the Ardennes forest into a frozen wasteland. Thick snow blanketed everything, muffling sounds and hiding deadly dangers. In the strategic crossroads town of Bastogne, Belgium, the situation had become desperate. The brave soldiers of the American 101st Airborne Division, the legendary Screaming Eagles, were completely encircled by a massive German force. Food supplies had run dangerously low. Winter gear was almost non-existent. Ammunition was nearly exhausted. Outside the town, thousands of German troops, supported by waves of heavy tanks and artillery, waited like predators closing in for the kill. Then came the ultimatum. German General Heinrich von Luttwitz sent a formal, typed message demanding immediate surrender. The note was cold and direct. Give up now, or face complete and total destruction. From a German point of view, the Americans had no realistic choice. They were trapped, outnumbered, and running out of everything. Surrender seemed inevitable. Inside the command post, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe read the demand carefully. He paused for a moment, then crushed the paper in his hand. His reply was short, defiant, and now immortal. Nuts! That single word hit the German officers like a slap across the face. It wasn't just rude, it was infuriating. It made no sense according to traditional military thinking. By every standard rule of war, the 101st should have been finished. Yet these airborne warriors refused to follow the script. They didn't break. They didn't panic. And that stubborn resistance would leave a deep scar on the German army. Throughout the entire Second World War, the German Wehrmacht battled millions of Allied fighters across countless fronts. But they developed a special kind of bitterness and hatred reserved specifically for the men who wore the Screaming Eagle insignia on their shoulders. The Germans didn't just fight the 101st Airborne Division. Over time, they came to genuinely despise them. So why did one American division earn such intense animosity from battle-hardened German soldiers? To answer that, we need to dive into the unique mindset of the airborne trooper and how their fearless approach completely shattered German expectations and confidence. In ordinary ground warfare, few things terrified soldiers more than being surrounded. When enemy forces cut off your supply lines and attacked from all sides, fear and confusion often took over. Regular infantry units frequently collapsed, retreated in disorder, or surrendered when trapped. But paratroopers operated on an entirely different level. From the moment they earned their wings, airborne soldiers were trained for exactly this kind of fight. Their job was to jump straight into enemy territory, often far behind the front lines. Being cut off and surrounded wasn't a nightmare scenario for them. It was simply how they did business. They were drilled to defend in every direction at once. A full 360-degree battlefield. These men carried limited heavy weapons. They had no massive tank support and no safe rear area to fall back to. Instead, their entire fighting philosophy centered on fierce, aggressive action right where they stood. They turned isolation into an advantage through sheer willpower and localized violence. The Germans learned this painful lesson on the very first day of the Normandy invasion, June 6, 1944, D-Day. When the 101st Airborne jumped into the darkness over France, everything went wrong. Anti-aircraft fire lit up the sky, thick clouds confused the pilots, and the paratroopers were scattered across miles of countryside. Many soldiers landed alone, far from their units, with only their rifles and grenades. For the Germans, this looked like an easy opportunity to wipe out a disorganized enemy. Instead, it quickly turned into a terrifying ordeal. Because the Americans were spread out everywhere, German commanders couldn't pinpoint where the real threat was coming from. Small groups of determined paratroopers appeared suddenly in the night, cutting communication lines, ambushing supply convoys, and knocking out artillery positions with ruthless efficiency. The Germans became convinced they were facing a much larger invading force, perhaps 10 times the actual number. Chaos spread through their ranks. What should have been a quick victory became a nightmare of hit-and-run attacks and constant uncertainty. A few days later, The rivalry grew even fiercer at the crucial town of Carentan. This key crossroads had to be taken to link up the American forces landing on Utah and Omaha beaches. The Germans responded by sending in their own elite paratroopers, the Fallschirmjäger, highly trained and battle-hardened fighters. What followed was an intense, house-to-house bloodbath between two of the best airborne forces in the world. The fighting was savage. Yet even when suffering terrible losses, the men of the 101st refused to back down. They pressed forward with bayonets fixed and grenades in hand, attacking relentlessly. In the end, they seized Carentan and sent a clear message to the Germans. These American paratroopers were no ordinary conscripts who would fold under pressure. They were elite warriors, aggressive, skilled, and deadly. The resentment only grew stronger in September 1944 during Operation Market Garden in the Netherlands. The 101st was dropped deep into Holland with orders to capture and hold a chain of vital bridges. Their goal was to open a corridor so British armored units could race forward and cross the Rhine River. The narrow road they had to protect soon earned the grim nickname Hell's Highway. German panzer divisions repeatedly slammed into the lightly armed American paratroopers. German tank crews would advance confidently, expecting the infantry to scatter in fear. Instead, the Screaming Eagles used clever tactics that drove their opponents mad with frustration. They would hide in roadside ditches, allow the tanks to roll past, then strike from behind with bazookas and improvised sticky bombs. They fought with a stubborn creativity and raw aggression that German commanders found impossible to predict. Even when the Germans managed to cut the highway temporarily, the 101st would launch lightning counterattacks, often in the dead of night, and reclaim the road within hours. The Germans preferred orderly, planned operations relying on superior firepower and strict discipline. The 101st gave them the opposite: pure chaos, sudden violence, and total unpredictability. This style of fighting humiliated the Wehrmacht again and again. But the ultimate showdown in this growing feud happened in the icy forests around Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last desperate gamble on the Western Front. In mid-December 1944, the German leader launched a massive surprise offensive aimed at splitting the Allied armies and capturing the vital port of Antwerp. For this bold plan to succeed, the Germans absolutely needed control of the road network that ran through Bastogne. It was the central hub, the key to keeping their tanks fueled and their troops moving. If Bastogne held firm, the entire offensive risked stalling, running out of fuel, and collapsing in the snow. Allied Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower understood the stakes perfectly. He rushed the 101st Airborne Division into the town just hours before the German trap closed. Almost immediately, multiple German divisions surrounded the defenders. Day and night, heavy artillery shells rained down on the positions. The weather was so terrible that Allied aircraft couldn't fly in supplies or reinforcements. The men of the 101st endured freezing temperatures in shallow foxholes, sharing tiny rations and carefully counting every bullet. From the German side, the Americans looked like nothing more than a temporary obstacle, something that should be crushed within a day or two. Instead, the Screaming Eagles became an unbreakable wall. When German forces assaulted the perimeter, the paratroopers didn't just hold their ground. They responded with fierce, well-timed counterattacks that shocked their attackers. Even if a German tank managed to break through the lines, the airborne soldiers didn't flee. They stayed calm in the snow, separated the tank from its supporting infantry, and took it out in brutal close-quarters combat using whatever weapons they had left. General McAuliffe's famous one-word reply of "nuts" wasn't empty bravado. It perfectly captured the fighting spirit of every man dug in around Bastogne. These soldiers didn't feel trapped or doomed. In their minds, they had the Germans right where they wanted them, forced to attack and to prepare defenses and paying a heavy price for every yard. For days, the 101st held the town against overwhelming odds. Their stubborn defense completely wrecked the German schedule. Hitler's final major offensive slowly bled out in the freezing Ardennes, its momentum destroyed. When relief finally arrived from Patton's Third Army, just after Christmas, the damage was already done. The Battle of the Bulge had turned into a costly failure for Germany. By the closing months of the war, the simple image of the screaming eagle patch had become instantly recognizable and hated across the German military. The 101st Airborne didn't just defeat German units on the battlefield. They repeatedly humiliated the proud Wehrmacht by proving that elite training, unbreakable morale, and aggressive spirit could overcome superior numbers and equipment. The Germans had built their reputation on powerful panzer tactics, iron discipline, and overwhelming firepower. Yet time after time, they found themselves outmaneuvered and psychologically broken by lightly armed infantrymen who had literally dropped from the sky, carrying little more than rifles, explosives, and an extraordinary willingness to fight to the death. The 101st didn't merely win tactical victories. They shattered the German belief in their own military superiority. They showed the world that no amount of tanks or artillery could crush the will of soldiers who had already accepted being surrounded and simply refused to care. These men turned every disadvantage into fuel for their aggression. That fierce mindset is what made the Screaming Eagles so dangerous and so deeply resented by their enemies. Now I want to hear from you. What do you believe was the single most defining moment for the 101st Airborne Division during the entire Second World War? Was it the chaos of D-Day in Normandy, the brutal street fighting at Carentan, the desperate defense along Hell's Highway, or the legendary stand at Bastogne with that unforgettable nuts reply? Drop your thoughts and favorite stories in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most intense rivalries of World War II and want more raw, untold stories from the brutal realities of the war, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're building a community here on WW2 Impact dedicated to exploring the human side of history, the courage, the sacrifices, and the moments that changed everything. If this video helped you understand why the 101st Airborne earned such respect and fear, please give it a thumbs up and share it with fellow history fans. Your support helps us create more detailed, high-quality content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll uncover another forgotten chapter from the Second World War. Stay curious, and never forget the men who fought in the snow, the mud, and the sky. Until next time, this is WW2 Impact.